Hello, everybody. Grab your snacks and sit back. It is time for lunch and lore. This is Tormented by Gnomes, joined by NinjaManMat. Matt, how you doing today?
I am good. I'm good. Everything's going really well for me.
All right, chat has given you disadvantage. Thank you, Drew. Uh,
Nice. I love it.
which I think means that the first time this episode, if we like disagree on a point of what is and is not
You
canon,
can't say that after I got the disadvantage. That's not a
that
thing.
means I win.
Okay. Okay. You know what? Hey, get in the comments, chat. Unthrone this man.
All right, so today's topic. Last week we talked about the Infernals, the
Yeah.
invaders and colonizers from the Hungry Dark who arrived to just shut down and take over Anacra. Disadvantage on us and disadvantage on our cow. Thank you, some guy, for your constant support. Um,
You own a cow now, mate?
no, but I'm frequently told not to have one.
Oh, yes. Yes.
All right, so let's talk about Celestials. We talked about what fiends are, and while we sort of said, yeah, it's possible to have a good fiend, but it'd be like a mischievous spirit. Fiends are all sort of spirits derived from some rooted in some abstract concept, usually a negative or at least chaotic and mischievous one. Let's talk about Celestials in Anacra.
Yes.
So, the Celestials are literally celestial, as in they are the stars in our setting.
Yes.
Yeah, they are the stars.
Celestials are kind of a big deal. I mean, in terms of just mere mortals interacting, you're definitely going to see a lot more people in Anakra having interactions with even infernals, but demons, things of a underworld nature. You're going to have a lot more cultists for that, and then you are going to. You're not, especially in an adventuring day, you're not really going to be coming across an angel coming down from heaven saying, "Hey, I'm going to stop you," which I mean is pretty intrinsic to D&D in general.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly players play good people. You fight a lot of bad people, so there's not a whole. Even though there are stats for angels in the book, there's not a whole lot of usual encounters that come up where you're going to go battle seraphins and whatnot.
Well,
But
it's
especially in Anakra, they're really tucked away in
mhm.
comparison to, I think, a lot of other normal cosmologies, you know?
It's kind of a given in most D&D settings, unless you use one of those angels or dicks sort of
Yes.
cosmologies. You don't fight angels because angels are really powerful and they're generally helping you out. So
Yeah.
you, as a writer, you have to shuffle them off to the side. It's the same problem that anybody who wants to play in the Judeo-Christian theology mythology sandbox has to deal with. If you want to have, Lucifer, Satan, traditional demons and devils from that mythos in your setting, that usually implies the existence of angels and the Judeo-Christian God, both
Yeah.
of whom, read as written in the original source books, are way stronger than the forces of evil. So how do you have a
Yes.
setting where your heroes have to do stuff when there are good guy powers that could are way stronger that could do something? You always have to come up with a contrivance of some kind to say, well, why doesn't God just intervene? Why don't the angels just show up and smite everything? So it's very traditional in D&D games to have the forces of light and goodness elsewhere. They're busy, they have something, there's some reason why they're not solving all the problems, which is why adventures are going to happen and things will actually be interesting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same reason why Elminster and the other archmages just don't go around, all the good ones anyway, just
Right.
don't go around solving every problem because that's not the point of the story. I'm here to make sure that I can facilitate you hobbits to get the ring there. I can't just do it myself.
I have to go fight the necromancer. You guys keep doing your thing. Um,
Exactly.
and what was I going to say? Oh yeah, that's one complaint that people sometimes have. For example, there with the main Forgotten Realms modules that have been coming out over the last few years. For example, in Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, Matt, I know you're a player in my campaign in that setting, but I'm going to drop a spoiler here.
Oh,
At
no.
some point in the campaign, you go to hell. I know that's a shocker.
What? Are you kidding me?
I know,
In the
right?
Descent into Avernus campaign? We're
Mm-hmm.
going into Avernus?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my
And
god.
one of the complaints that people have about it is that it's designed for you. This is more spoilers. You're designed to start your adventures in hell around level 5. Now, I've unlocked the level cap for your campaign, so if you guys power level before then, you'll be a little bit stronger, but it's hell. Like hell's full
It's
of encounters that are unwinnable. So maybe you can grind to, in bulk, you can kill boars long enough until you actually have the XP to win some unwinnable encounters, but it's still going to be
Hey,
tough.
we're killing crabs, man. We're going after those giant enemy crabs right now.
uh, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so one of the complaints people have about the campaign is why is this party of level 5 characters going to hell on this important mission? Where are all the great big gigantic heroes of the Forgotten Realms? And it's a question that there are some read as written. It's because, well, this is the adventure we bought and we want to do it, but they don't really
Yeah.
give a good explanation for it. Some of the mods and such that I have for the campaign should hopefully ameliorate that to a certain degree. But I digress. The point is, in Anacra, the Celestials are stars. They are literally the stars. When you look up at the night sky, you are looking at the Celestials. So their primary duties are to stand watch along the firmament, the borders of Anacra, the edge of this universe, and keep an eye out, looking out into the hungry dark, which is where things like the Infernals and the One Flesh originally came to plague Anacra.
Only two of many dangers that lurk out in
Mm-hmm.
the ever expansing hungry dark.
Exactly. So why aren't they always solving all of your earthly problems? Because the Celestials are less concerned. It's they are opposed to the Infernals, but this isn't Diablo, where the high heavens and the burning hells are locked into an eternal struggle. The Infernals are more often at war against Ramius, the Lord of the Dead. Like his legions of the dead are busier keeping the Infernals in check than the Celestials are, because the Celestials' job is to make sure that no other apocalyptic threats enter. They are busy at the edge of reality. They have
They
two.
mostly want to make sure that just life continues. It's not about like, oh, good must be spread across the world. It's like, look, you guys worry about your morality issues. We're just making sure you can keep playing this game. Do you understand?
Yes. And a lot of celestials do have those aspects of, if a fiend might be an abstract manifestation of selfishness, hatred,
Oh yeah,
greed,
absolutely.
etc. Celestials do tend to have abstract roots in things like compassion, mercy, justice, creativity, love. Other things that we might see as virtues do tend to be intrinsic to their essence, but their duties as the sentinels at the edge of reality consume most of their time. Uh,
Absolutely. I mean, like we talked about in previous episodes, you have to in an Anacra have some kind of domain or some kind of button or interest that you are taking a kind of physical manifestation or spiritual manifestation for in order to have real power. So they
mhm,
absolutely have. And as a mortal creature, you likely, if you know about it, I think that it's much more difficult to find lore about celestials considering they're very ancient. And when new stars do pop up, it's a prophetic adventure to
mhm.
make sure things like that can actually happen. So there is new stuff being cataloged all the time in regards to those kind of lexicons. But I digress. You would definitely not have many experiences on the regular, except for like great sages holding on to crazy amounts of information about celestials. But if you did, I would see no reason why you probably couldn't pray to or even draw power from a celestial being. It's just that that's not really their thing. If you're pushing for something that might be a little more in line with what they're into, then absolutely you could probably draw from that.
Celestial power as a magical energy source is definitely available, and there are rites that can draw upon it, but a lot of those rites and spells are performed by people who don't directly worship celestials. It's more like if a given celestial is imbued with the virtue of protecting the weak and uplifting the lowly, then somebody who believes in those values may learn rites and spells and prayers to invoke that power without even knowing the name of the celestial whose power they're tapping into.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It's definitely like a more distant connection in most cases. And that is, again, because celestials are preoccupied with this cosmic scope of making sure that new world ending threats do not enter the world.
It was kind of like we talked about how there are some entities that just are intrinsic to Anakra and they don't require prayer to get more powerful. It's nice if it happens. There are some entities that, in order to get where they need to be, they have to and consume and get prayer in order to get that level of power to try and become a little more permanent. I would say Celestials are probably right up there with the Titans and Sovereigns in regards to look, God does not need prayer badly. God just needs it. stay away from all of your crazy affairs and just do our
Mm,
job. We're literally just staring out, making perception checks into the empty dark, making sure that nothing else comes through the net that is the firmament, keeping you all safe from giant space fleas from nowhere.
exactly. So there's actually some things that I have, as one of the co-creators of Anacra, haven't fully answered about Celestials. Let's start with the things that we do know. So Celestials are self-sustaining. They don't require prayer or any other energy source. They have this inner well of light that empowers them. So they're good on that front. They come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, from tiny little, floating lights to gigantic god-slaying angels. Uh, they are primarily located along the firmament, which is not really one of the four kingdoms. It's like the edge of the four kingdoms. The firmament is the defensive barrier that rises as a natural result of the way the four kingdoms are locked together. It's not like a place in and of itself. It's more like if there's interference between the wavelengths of the different kingdoms that creates this sort of distortion field or vibration. That is the firmament, and that is very difficult for creatures outside the four kingdoms to enter, and for creatures inside the four kingdoms to leave. So the Celestials occupy this metaphysical space. If you just fly straight up, I am inclined to say you will never reach the firmament. If you literally just fly straight up, I am inclined to say it's going to require something more.
I almost feel like, in a way, the firmament, like you described, is almost it's less a wall or a net, and it's more like an atmosphere. But if the atmosphere itself was its own kind of pocket dimension in a way,
Yeah, it's
uh,
it's like the
I
magnetic sphere that surrounds the planet.
yeah, it borders just about everything. But like you said, unless you know the right way to get there, you wouldn't be able, even as an Arakocra or something, to just fly. I mean, you would freeze and pass out before you ever got there if it was possible.
Right. We have a couple of questions from chat. One, are the Azimar always the result of a celestial portals? Are there other ways? What about tieflings? So we have an Azimar, obviously, Aaron Vol from the Quest for the Book of Dawn, whose father is a celestial. And his father is sort of a celestial who abandoned their watch point and just decided to enjoy the world. I'm going to do a brief aside before we talk about that, and we're going to talk about fallen celestials. In Anacra, because the Celestials, yeah, they are supposed to be these archons of virtue and such, but they weren't created by a god who has decided what is and is not morally correct. When a Celestial in Anacra falls, they don't necessarily lose all their powers because those powers are not granted by their service. Those powers are sort of hard coded into them.
Yeah.
A fallen Celestial is less likely to become a fiend, though that definitely is possible if they sort of embody something new. They're more likely to just forget their calling, ditch their cause, have their own agenda, and do other stuff. So it's less like they turn dark and sinister and evil, and more like they just sort of turn into a gray Jedi sort of thing. Except a gray
I
Jedi
actually
who's washed.
I wanted to touch on that with you, mate.
Mm-hmm.
Considering what we're discussing here, this is a great time to do so. I think, in a way, like you said, the power itself is hard coded, and I think that the job is pretty hard coded into a celestial. But like you were saying, it's not like they lose all free will. They're still whatever entity they were before they went through this transformation. Because from as far as I remember, from what we're saying, a celestial isn't just like you said. It's not a mode of light that's just born from nothing. It comes from somewhere. It's usually some kind of creature has gone through the steps in order to become ascended in some
Mm-hmm.
way. And now that it has a purpose, it has powers to help it with that purpose. But from what we've seen, and again, I think that I've probably done more of this in my home games than you have in your streams. But I've been using, whenever there is a great message or something that needs to be done, usually Celestials, when they're not guarding the borders of the world, are sent as these very important listen to me messengers or kind of guides. And my thought would be that they kind of are switched out, because if you take this entity that basically has now been sent off on a mission saying you'll never be able to see your home again, you're not being punished, this is actually a great honor. However, you probably would have these pangs of missing your old life. And the more you're shown this world, unless you are just completely detached from it, like you said, there might be instances where if you do that a little too much, you might, even if you come across someone that reminds you of your past, something to that effect, you may be derelict in your duties or just go completely AWOL. And we haven't really gone into what happens to Celestials that go AWOL or how difficult that would be. I would assume that that would be a very rare occurrence, someone actually doing
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
It would definitely be a rare occurrence. So I think what we've established is that Celestials don't need prayer, but they do need purpose. And if you fall from their purpose, I think what happens is that light imbued within them, it's not like, again, you get the Lucifer treatment and fall through reality, smash into hell, blah, blah, blah. I think it's like the longer and the more distant you come from that guardianship, the more that light fades. So it doesn't just go out, it dwindles over time. You
Yes.
shift, it's like you transition from being this immortal entity back to being a mortal of some kind. Uh, the Azamar do
Which in a
not.
way kind of makes sense
Mhm.
because you figure if we're not removing celestials aren't removed from the cycle, you would figure that even if you had an entity that millennia ago ascended and transformed into a celestial, it's very likely that they would eventually need to go back into the cycle. And once their job either is over or they've got enough replacement stars to kind of fill the spot, let's say, for instance, that you're feeling like an honor guard watching this very particular tear in the firmament after millennia, and you went from having one to two to now 20. You might not need some of the original honor guard anymore, and they might, like you said, kind of feel that sense of removed purpose, or just creatures that were not initially born to be immortal, I figure eventually might go mad over time or lose a sense of themselves and would need to kind of go back and return to the primordial muck from which they came. So that would make a lot of sense.
There's a couple of ways that could go down. You could see like the mortal part of them fading away as they become more and more the embodiment of this star, so they forget what it is to
Yes.
be mortal and they grow more and more detached. Or they could need to be recycled. Even the ones that like go full star and really leave behind all traces of their mortal memory, like the world of Anacra itself is part of the cycle. So even the most immortal, eternal celestials, at some point, they're still bound up in the birth, life, death, and renewal of the world itself. But I do think there's sort of two trajectories you can have, different arcs you can have. Some of them, if they hit this critical mass, they achieve orbit. Now they're caught up in the cycle of the universe itself, and they're the most removed from mortality. Others might have a very long arc, stand watch for a very long time, but eventually they need to die and be renewed. And that might be what some shooting stars are. When you see a shooting star, some of them are celestials that are sort of falling, not from grace, oh, it's so bad, but they're like, it's my time. I need to die. Been here for too long. Or it could be a
It's
celestial
my
that.
time. Are you kidding me? Ooh.
They could also be celestials who have fallen in battle against some cosmic horror at the edge of reality, or celestials who just said, fuck this shit, I'm out. Quit. Like,
Or
there's.
possibly a celestial like bearing a great either prophecy or message and is
Mhm.
literally descending down from the firmament into very likely the mortal plane or whatever kingdom it is that is experiencing that shower or falling star.
It makes sense that they'd be messengers because the word angel is derived from the Hebrew word messenger, if I recall correctly. But I do
I'm
think
not going
that
to comment on that, but I'm sure you're right.
angels, celestials that get more ground duty do tend to, their light tends to fade because they become more and more attached to less abstract, more tangible things, and so that decreases their light. As for Asmars and Tieflings, the simplest way, not simplest, but like the most obvious way is for someone to actually, you know, breed with a mortal. So there's some sort of crossing of the bloodlines. But if you're born on holy ground, or you're born under the light of a shooting star, or you're somehow infused with radiant energy, or something happens, you could be born as an Azamar, even if you have no genetic connection to a celestial. Same thing with a Tiefling.
Yeah, I was going to say, much like tieflings, the tiefling byproduct isn't always because of the union or bloodline. You could have a group of cultists that made a pact with an infernal, and thereon after, their children would all bear the mark of their initial taint. And even if the tieflings themselves don't have any connection to evil, that dark bargain that was made before their
Mm-hmm.
time could continue on. And very similar, something could happen with a very saintly group. They could then bear Asimar children, and they don't have any real connection to that other than the fact that they in their life did great works. And now their lineage, or at least maybe their direct descendants, are blessed with with those properties.
Apparently, I have to talk like this for 2 minutes because of channel points. I will allow this once and never again. This was not in the original intended usage of the rules, but when your players come up with something once, you want to reward that creativity, let them get away with it, and then patch the rule set so that later on you don't have to endure these embarrassments ever again.
Hey, mate, can you say she sells seashells down by the seashore just one time really quick for me, please?
Seashells by the seashore. It,
Or
it
where the sun shines on the shop signs?
No, you really want something that has more owl sounds in it, like robot or the Wasawaptor,
How
or
about I was in the Overwatch League?
I was in the Overwatch League.
Okay, good. There we go. Uh, a chat had a really good idea as well. Disadvantage could mean also being like silenced for a minute or two, to where if you wanted to do like a, hey, Matt, what do you think about that? And it's like, oh, you agree with me. It's like, very good. All right. I think the problem is, though, we would end up with literally like 20 people just silencing us, and we would have an hour-long stream of just us sitting here twiddling our thumbs because chat says don't talk for 20 minutes.
Wubba baby bubby bubby wubba baby buggy bumpers. All right, I'm done with that. Yeah. So like I said, we're gonna turn that shit off next time because that's 100%
Yeah,
not
an
the
hour-long
intended
staring
usage.
contest. Exactly. That would be hilarious.
All right, let's answer some more questions from chat. So we had the question about tieflings and Azamar, which again, it doesn't have to be genetic. It could be some sort of energy connection instead. What else did we have? Could that well of light be captured, stolen, given? So the actual source of celestial energy. So unless you have something in mind, I believe this ties into the origin of the celestials, which is a little
I
bit
was going to
wibbly
say,
wobbly.
I think we should probably use this question as a springboard to kind of move into what is the origin of celestials, which is I think what we were about to get into
Mm-hmm.
anyway, and then we can kind of spread out from there. I have been playing a lot with the Sky Kingdom and the Celestial Realm in my game, but again, um, not having a chance to go over it with you, I'd like to see what your thoughts on it are, and then we can kind of compare notes from there and see where we want to go.
Okay. So, lore wise, story wise, this is one of those points that is in, I don't want to say contention, but it's sort of it's gone through multiple iterations.
Yeah.
Raelta, who is a Titan who descends from Vindur and Liban, is the Star Kindler. He is the one who set the stars up at their watch posts in the sky. She did so in defiance of her father Vindur, and in at least one version of the lore, this happened after the One Flesh descended. So, quick breakdown of why the stars have their jobs. You had the Dawn era. The world was in creative mode. The Infernals invade. They attempt to colonize. They attempt to subjugate everybody and twist all the resources of the world to their own will. They get their asses kicked by the dragons who are let in from the gates of the Silent City. The sovereigns create the firmament. They divide the Dawn world into the four kingdoms. The interaction of those four kingdoms creates this protective shell so that Anacra is no longer permeable, so it can no longer be colonized. All right, that should have done it. And that was sealed up nice and tight. But the firmament was based in part, the integrity of the firmament was based in part by its creators, the sovereigns. So Uzul, now trapped in Anacra, which is no longer malleable like the Dawn world was, he can't just change it via sheer force of will, comes up with a plot. And he finds a way to kill Arakura's avatar, discorporate Arakura, the Sovereign of Stones. In doing so, the firmament is weakened. It's not destroyed, but it is no longer sealed tight. The smell of the earth's blood leaks out through these gaps in the firmament into the hungry dark. The one flesh drifting through the void smells that. It is drawn to Four Kingdoms Anacra. And let me check the timeline because the exact order of operations. Okay, Apotheosis of Ramius. All right. So Ramius accesses the source code of the universe, the Emerald Tablets, rewrites the rules so that the dead now go into the underworld not simply for processing, but they come and join his armies. He also recodes things so that fiends are dragged forcibly into the underworld. They have to dwell there. He imprisons the Infernals, their armies, all of them in the underworld so they can no longer rule over the mortal world. Right?
But just jumping in real quick, we did want to confirm that tieflings, while having fiendish heritage, are not fiends themselves, so they were not dragged into the underworld.
Correct. They are mortals. They have free will. They were not dragged in, but actual full-fledged fiends, infernals, etc., were all dragged in. All right. That should solve your problem. However, after that, the one flesh finally arrives. It's been drifting through the void for a while. It reaches the firmament. The firmament is still closed, but it's like a piece of armor that's sort of been loosened a little bit. So the one
There's
flesh,
gaps, there's
mm,
weaknesses, there's places where you can puncture through in a
right.
way.
So the one flesh squeezes through the firmament and drops into Anacra. Lee rips up a huge chunk of a continent, smashes it down into the ocean, goes underneath the new continent of Tamrian, wrestles with the One Flesh. In response to this, there's not really a high council of gods. It's not like they have, a UN of the sovereigns and the titans to figure out how they're going to respond to the
And
last time.
Zoom wasn't a thing yet, so Vendor couldn't just, call the others and be like, "Hey guys, we need to talk about this." It was just,
Exactly.
"Oh no, things are happening."
And at this point, Sin was already sort of saying, "Fine, I'll do it myself," running Sharon. Although it may have happened shortly after that. Yeah, it happened after the Descent of the One Flesh. The Descent of the One Flesh and the fall of Ioth, it all sort of pushed Sin to the edge, and he decided, "Screw this, I'm going to go play Civilization in the desert and create the perfect society." Vindur was already in the process of the conquest of the skies, because when his sister Arakura was killed, he responded by becoming paranoid.
And he kind of turtled up. So you have two
Mm-hmm.
beings that are turtling up, one that has been discorporated and one that is kind of lost undersea in an infinite battle that
Yes.
could still be going on to this day.
So the one flesh is contained, but the long-term problem of there's a weakness, a flaw in the firmament, not solved. So Raelta, Vindur's daughter, does something. And I haven't really now originally I had a better idea of what that something was, but now that the mechanics and metaphysics of Anacra have progressed, I'm less clear on exactly what that thing is. But essentially, she creates the stars because she says we need a security system at the edge of the firmament to keep an eye out for colonizers and invaders and to keep an eye out for refugees. So she defies Vindur because Vindur says, "I'm in charge of the Sky Kingdom. I'm in charge of, the highest world. So I will keep an eye out over everything and nobody goes above my authority." And Raelta literally goes above Vindur's authority by creating the stars. Again, I'm not totally clear on the metaphysics of how she did this. I do know that she has a prophecy, and we've talked a little bit about how prophecy works in Anacra. Prophecy is not foretelling what is going to happen. It is not fate. It is not destiny. It is not hard coded. This thing will come to pass. Prophecy is if then else.
It's like a recipe.
It's a recipe. So Raelta creates or discovers a process by which mortals can become infused with celestial energy, thereby transforming from mortals into stars. The only things I'm really sure about are that celestial energy is part of Anacra before. It's not like it didn't exist before she did this. And I know that it is often linked to emotions like compassion, charity, mercy, but also justice. So it is this elemental force of light that is also tied into certain aspects, emotions, or morality.
Like
So,
we were discussing on our magic episode, not to
mhm,
cut you off, my apologies. I was just kind of chiming in. I feel like how we were talking about, especially in the underworld, how you said it was. We talked about how it was a place of recycling, a place of processing souls, getting them
mhm,
back into the swing of things. And initially, there still is, but there was all these elemental pools that were down there, all these wells that everything had started in effectively. And much like the elemental wells and pools, we had positive and negative energy pools that were just going down there. So I wouldn't exactly say that it is just raw positive energy, but I think probably tapping into everything at her disposal, Rialta likely was like, well, the best thing to use would be Dawn magic, but that's not readily available, nor is there a lot of it left. So I'm thinking using the principles of Dawn, my thought would be that considering she came from this very tempestuous and powerful god of the sky and this very mysterious and secretive god of the ocean, likely I would feel that Rialta would cherry pick a lot of different magical types, like positive energy, maybe even a bit of sky magic or water magic, and kind of started mixing it all together. And she didn't create her own magic, but I feel like Celestial was something that, much like Infernal magic, didn't necessarily start there, but
Hmm.
was manufactured after the fact and kind of became its own thing.
Mm.
And I feel like it has, like you said, it's vigor magic. It has, hope and charity. It's basically all of the hope and promises that she is making, to where she's having to rebel against her father, but she's not doing that teenager like, "Oh, dad, you don't know any better, and I'm just gonna go out there and have all the fun I want." I
Hmm.
feel like, especially during his conquest of the Sky Kingdom, she feels like even though he's saying, "I will be the champion of the sky, I will watch for the dangers above," he's so focused on his selfish tirades that he's not really gonna be there, and he, if anything, would do like Vaughn did and would fix it after the fact, which Rialta says, no, we can't just keep fixing these entities that keep trying to push their way in here. And she comes up with this plan to make sure that, hey, I'm gonna put sentries on the wall. I'm gonna make sure that this thing that you know our that our creators had made in order to make sure that we are stayed safe and secretive. We're going to make sure that we have guards helping to make sure that if anything starts pushing its way through, we can thrust it back out or deter it if it's kind of coming this way. Something like that.
I agree. I think celestial energy is an admixture of uh, positive energy derived from just it was ambient in Anacra, but it's also sort of woven into the firmament itself. I think I have this idea that
Yes.
celestials are like tethered to the firmament. Some aspect of that interaction of the different four kingdoms is used as the crystalline structure that magic takes up. So they actually have this tether, this bond to the firmament, which is why they're able to exist there when really nothing else does. It's this
And
metaphysical in between space.
And in a way, I'm a big fan of that. I agree with you, and I feel like I was always kind of there with you in the first place. In a way, it gives us that nice duality between the fiends that are trapped in the underworld and the celestials that have effectively been exiled to the firmament. You have these fiends that literally want out, but they can't get out, and they're trapped in the underworld. And then you have these celestials that have kind of in this self-imposed exile, to where they are protecting the world, but they're really not of it. And they have, rather than physical, actual, or metaphysical barriers that are keeping them, it's kind of like their honor or their own rules that are keeping them from just going down
Mm-hmm.
into the world below?
I also like this because infernal magic is alien to Anacra. It derives from some of the stuff that's already there. Let's take a little fire magic for hellfire. Let's take a little necrotic magic. But it's sent through this lens of one, cruelty, selfishness, sin, and evil, and two, these otherworldly entities that don't belong there in the first place. And its opposite, celestial magic, does some of the same stuff. It derives from other forms of energy, but it's passed through this lens of being intrinsically connected to the very fabric of reality. So, whereas infernal magic is this alien magic, celestial magic is this native magic that is, again, inherent to the very structure of Anacra itself. So
Absolutely.
each of them has sort of this its shape or its crystalline form, and then the energy that flows through it. So that is what makes it celestial magic, and that is why when a celestial leaves the firmament, their power begins to dwindle because their power and their nature is derived from that connection to the structure of reality. So the more they're in the four kingdoms instead of at the edges guarding them, the less their tether, that tether weakens.
And then you can end up with, let's say, for instance, a celestial that maybe somebody found the true name to, is constantly summoning, saying, "Hey, I need your help." It's like, "Oh, I really shouldn't be here, but okay, I'll give you a hand." You're seeking to, help truth, justice, and the American dream. I totally get that. And eventually, you get a character like Aaron Vol's parent, who is like, "Hey, uh, my tether's gone, and nothing's really keeping me up there. And even though I feel like I am a stage lower than maybe I once was in terms of my phenomenal cosmic power,
Mm-hmm.
I can now go do whatever I want, and I'm going to go do whatever I want." And then you end up with that kind of an Azamar.
All right. So I think that what Rialta discovered was this process for tethering mortals to the firmament and infusing them with this light. And that is so originally, I believe, and this is subject to wibbly wobbliness, there were no stars before the one flesh. The night sky was empty.
I mean, I feel like there would be ambient light because, of course, out there in the hungry dark, there are stars somewhere.
Hmm.
But they're so far away that I feel like it may be. I think what I want to steer away from is, and again, we don't need to get into the whole like how things are in reality versus how they are in Anacra,
Hmm.
especially because we literally have a Titan that drags the sun across the sky. Very old mythos, myths, and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like the night definitely wasn't just pitch black, but like you're right. I don't think we had literal stars that dotted the skies.
There's some like nebula, Milky Way, vague,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
bright mists up there. It shouldn't be a problem because, for the most part, our intended campaign space is essentially where the Book of Dawn quest is afterwards. Like, we
Yeah.
have some of the timelines in mind for when is the current year for Anacra if we ever do a source book, but it's definitely after the creation of the stars.
I mean,
So,
and plus it's pretty on brand considering the
mhm,
early days of, of civilization was under the duress of demonic incursion.
mhm.
I'm sure not a lot of people were really worried about, hey, why is the sky just empty and black at night? They had more important things to worry
Exactly. They're
about.
too busy. Why am I being sacrificed to Uzul?
And then one day they're like, hey, did you guys notice? Like, there's some pretty stuff going on up there.
Mm.
Oh my God, you're right. It looks gorgeous. That's amazing. Did you ever notice that? You know what? I was too busy worrying about the flesh being peeled off of my arms and legs to really notice, but it's lovely actually now that you mention it. I like it.
Lightfoot asked if that well of light could be captured, stolen, or given. So it can't be stolen, like, because it's not a single artifact. It's not a single place that you can go to take it. I definitely think that there's a world where you could mess with that magic and use it improperly, infuse it in somebody who hasn't gone through the right steps. You could definitely steal it, but it's not, again, you can't steal the source of all. It's not like the crystal arch in Diablo where when Diablo eats it, all the angels just wink out of existence, and then when it's repaired, they all come back. There's no single point of failure for the Celestials. Even if Raelta was to be discorporated, the Celestials would still exist. There's also
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, I agree. They wouldn't just wink out of existence, but
Mm-hmm.
that is a good point that I don't know if we've ever touched on is there a way to become a celestial, either through prophecy or otherwise, that isn't directly related to Rialta? I feel like she doesn't really strike me as the kind of Titan that would be like, "Oh, I'm gonna hoard power like my father and make sure that I'm the only one who knows how to do this." I feel like, especially as time goes on and it becomes very apparent that gods and monsters can be killed or die, that she would want to make sure that she has a failsafe or someone that she's taught this to. I have to
Mm-hmm.
imagine that that's a thing.
Yeah, well, that's the prophecy of the new day. Let's talk about that a little bit. So, when
That's a good point.
Raelta originally kindled the stars, I want to say that the process was taking a bunch of souls, either mortals who like were willing to volunteer or souls from the underworld, and straining them through the celestial lights, the northern lights, which are the celestial lights are a manifestation of that celestial energy interacting with the sky kingdom. It's that after Raelta created the stars, it kind of popped a hole in the sky kingdom. It weakened Vindur directly by passing all this energy through his realm when he didn't want it to happen because he's a controlling asshole. So the
Yeah.
celestial lights are the interaction of this celestial energy with the sky kingdom. And when you become a star, when you become a celestial, you pass through it, and the process of passing through that transforms you. But it is definitely possible for people to be imbued with celestial energy without undergoing that process. When the original stars were created, a ton of people, souls, etc., all passed through. One, the celestial lights came into existence because they didn't before, and two, a ton of souls and mortals passed through it at once in order to populate the sky, which was a grievous blow to Vindur because he had, again, in some ways, he is the Sky Kingdom. He refused to allow this because he's a control freak. So he held his power against it, and then he was not defeated, but like it punched a hole through that. So every time a new star rises, Vindur is diminished, which is one of the reasons why he's such a dick about this, and one of the reasons why he doesn't like mortals, because mortals are required in order to populate the sky with stars.
Now, I
So
did want to touch on this, mate, because again,
yeah.
like we said, there's been some changes to the cosmology of the world
Hmm.
since our inception, especially with recent changes with what's been going on. And I feel like in our old way of things, we had a few, very few important stars.
Hmm.
And now things have changed to where there's far more numerous stars. And I feel like if Vinder, took a punch to the gut or a, stab in the arm every time
Hmm.
somebody ascended, he'd be full of holes.
Right.
So I have to imagine that either it's just the really important ones that cause any lasting damage, or he's gotten to the point to where it's almost like a threshold. It's not like he's literally taking a point of damage every time it happens and eventually he will
Hmm.
die. I feel like it's okay. Now I've taken this much kind of damage and I can't take any more from this kind of celestial. But if any of these big players are brought in, you see what I mean? Because I think
Yeah.
what we're getting at here is that his refusal to work with his daughter is what is hurting him. It's not the
Hmm.
fact that she's choosing to be painful for him. There is a path to the heavens that goes through the Sky Kingdom, and he is straight up refusing it, and he's suffering for it.
Hmm.
Basically, he's jumping in front of the Kamehameha to save Gohan instead of pushing Gohan out of the way and just moving along with it. You know what I mean?
I was gonna say, instead of like jumping up in the waves at the beach, he's just trying to every single one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So here's my thoughts on that.
It's
One,
its own pride that's hurting him. Is what I'm getting at here.
precisely,
It's not
precisely.
anything else other than that.
So for starters, the initial kindling of the stars, it just had so many all at once that it caused him harm.
Yeah,
Now, like, there's stars of different degrees, right? Because we had a question in chat, is there a finite number of celestials? The answer to that is yes. It's a very large number, but it is a finite number. It's not an infinite cosmos. Uh, so, but there are stars of different degrees. And some souls, when they die, will become a lesser star if they were a particularly virtuous kind, defender of people and such. Then instead of going to the armies of Ramius, they might become a star and continue. There's still like the armies of Ramius, you have to serve to fight Infernals. If you're going to be a celestial, you're serving to keep watch over the universe. So either way, like, you're working in the afterlife, but you've got options. When one of
real
those,
quick before we move on from there, since
yeah,
we are instituting, and I think it makes sense for sure that there's a finite number of Celestials. Are we then imposing on the opposite spectrum? Is there a finite number of fiends that can exist in the world?
there isn't an infinite number of fiends. I think new fiends are being churned out all the time. Uh, so there isn't a cap on how many there can be, but it's not like the D&D cosmos where the abyss is literally infinite.
Literally infinite. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
we're not doing a lot of literal infinities. I think it's so profound that counting it is
I was
meaningless.
I was gonna say it was. I think both Celestials and fiends are almost like grains of sand. Is
Hmm.
there an infinite number of sand in the world? No, there's not. Could you count it all?
No,
Absolutely not.
yeah, agreed, agreed. It's like that. The other thing, though, is that there are archangels, star gods. We like to call them star gods. And these
Yeah.
are the big ones. These are the ones that would appear in the sky like as bright as the North Star,
Yes.
or, the planets, or the big constellations.
Constellations. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. And most of those were set up in the very beginning when the stars were kindled, and they're derived from the souls of powerful heroes or great healers or people of profound kindness or force of will, people whose souls burn that bright. Now, when somebody dies and becomes a celestial, that's a little pinprick for Vindur. It's not a big deal. It does injure him, but it's not like permanently debilitating.
Yeah.
Or if it is, again, it's like, yeah, it causes him damage, just like if one of your cells died.
Yeah.
But in order for a new star god to be born, that is a whole big deal. And that is where the prophecy of the new day kicks in,
Yeah.
where a the entire process for a new star god rising, it does not happen very often. Again, lots of people become celestials, very few people become archangels, star gods.
And
It,
what we mean by new day is we're kind of like we're assuming here that like the world itself is changing. It's going through either
mhm.
a civilizational up, kind of like moving from like Stone Age to Bronze Age, things like that. You're going through either a technological or a societal advancement where the world is no longer what it was, and this prophecy of the new day is kind of ushering in a new, like you said, archangel slash star god that is going to be overseeing the new world as it is going to be. The
Not
firmament basically grows with the world, as it were.
right. In order for this to happen, it's a very specific set of conditions that has to be met. Ooh, excuse me. I poured most of my coffee into my crotch this morning and I didn't get to actually drink it, so I'm running a little ragged.
It's less a promise between you and God saying, "Of course I'll be a great person." It's more like Jason and the Argonauts going off and doing Hercules' 12 labors, but like
Mm-hmm.
on the spiritual level to make sure that, oh yeah, this is a big deal and it's going to take a lot to make it happen. It's not just a promise and some special underwear, you know?
Yeah. It's a huge quest. Railta, we were talking about how much of a say does Railta have in this, and I don't think Railta like handpicks every single star. That is, I think it's more like when you die, if you just happen to have lived a certain type of life and gravitate a certain way, maybe Railta says, hey, I'm going to give you an offer here. Do you want to not go to Romulus' army? Maybe she handpicks those people, or maybe it's just something she sort of set up in the universe that works on its own. But
I
when it,
feel like it might be an envoy or something. One of those messengers would
yeah,
come down and petition for them.
mm-hmm,
Maybe very special cases you'd get Rialta herself, but I think mostly it would be a herald of some kind.
agreed. Whereas with the star gods, there's like those ones, Railta has a much stronger hand in picking. She usually sends somebody to guide them along their journey, multiple different guides, like a celestial, a light bearer to help them on the way and to actually do the selecting of the person. It's a whole quest line. I'm not going to get into the detail. There's some plot stuff in there. But when a new star god ascends, that directly harms Vindor in a major way. And I don't know if it's happened yet in our plot line, but Vindor will wipe out civilizations if he thinks that it's going to happen in order to stop it from happening. So it's a big deal. And these star gods are another category of deity in Anacra. We've talked about sovereigns, we've talked about titans. You know, you've got the Infernals, which the big name Infernals definitely serve as deities of some kind.
Oh
We've
yeah.
we've mentioned that deity in Anacra is definitely a moving target. You know, you could have a little river god who you're going to call a river god, but you could kill them in a fight.
Yeah.
The star gods are powerful enough to like function as deities. They can grant
Dude, did you just
spells.
drain the river god? What do you mean? Like, you put a dam here. Like, what do you think happens to this now wash basin of water? Like, well, I thought it'd be fine. No, man, are you kidding me? That's crazy.
I was more thinking, hey, we're going to go into the other world, find the river god, and kick its ass. But your
Oh,
method
yeah.
works too. Now, I'm also inclined to say that as of Quest for the Book of Dawn, we haven't detailed any major star gods, and neither have we detailed any major religions dedicated to them. In future eras, this is going to be a bigger thing that you see more often, whole churches dedicated to celestials and the like. But in the plotline that we've seen so far, I think in Amonkharok there was a religion dedicated to the Celestials. It was a very secretive astrology based religion that sought wisdom from the stars and kept its teachings mysterious to outsiders and channeled celestial magic in order to accomplish some sort of greater good. But the party didn't really take the bait and talk to them, so it didn't come up much. My point is, people dedicated to Celestials are pretty rare in the
Yeah.
current era of Anacra. And part of that is because the Celestials are new. If
Yeah.
the quest for the Book of Dawn takes place in the year 7344, just tracked from like the very beginning of the universe, um, the descent of the One Flesh was like 400 years ago. The stars are young. So that's one of the reasons, and they're more focused on doing their job than they are on building a fan club
Oh yeah.
down below. Can
Again,
the
God doesn't need worship badly in this stage of the game.
Exactly. Can the process for making celestials be stopped or reversed aside from destroying heroes before they become worthy? So, the process for new star gods, again, is extremely specific. It's very specific. There are certain secret, we're not going to reveal them at this time, conditions and deeds that have to be accomplished. Somebody has to do all these things, receive all these different signs, and then, you know, be touched by Railta, and then they're a burgeoning star god. So yeah, it can be stopped. That process can be stopped. It's a very complicated process. The simplest way is to just kill everyone involved, but like there's other ways to stop that we're not going to get into. If a person dies and gets contacted and said, "Hey, you want to sit at the edge of the universe forever?" I don't think there's really a way that that can be interfered with.
I think the closest we would get is that if there were, again, like a like the hero or saintly kind of person, I think what you'd be looking at is if for some reason a fiend or inferno was like, hey, you know what? Screw Celestials. I want to stop as many from being made as possible. I think you would see a lot of those temptations. You'd have a person that was very
Mm,
good or very saintly in life, someone who has devoted themselves and is a very likely candidate for being offered a ascension to Celestial. And either towards the end or even earlier in their life, you'd have like, hey, there's going to be a fiend just whispering in your ear or trying to get you to do bad things. And I feel like if you did enough bad stuff that might knock out the good stuff, I think that would be a pretty obvious, but
mhm,
really just, I mean, how are you gonna pick that? Unless you're obviously targeting a hero, then that makes the most sense. You'd have a fallen hero, a very Arthas figure, someone who was
mm,
trying to do good and they ended up faltering, the road to hell, good intentions and all that stuff.
mhm.
And then at the end of the rainbow, instead of getting, "Hey, you should come join us up in the heavens," it's like, "Ooh, buddy, yeah, things didn't really go so well for you, did they? I know you did everything you were supposed to, I get it, but you know what? You can take a seat down here with us and we'll make you something fun." That's probably about it.
But there aren't a lot of mechanical ways to like cheat or interrupt the process. The other thing though is that the Infernals, they don't like Celestials. They're not fans, and the Celestials aren't fans of the Infernals, but both groups kind of have their own thing going on. The Infernals being trapped by the Celestials isn't really a problem for the Infernals because they're still trapped in the underworld, right? Like the firmament isn't even their problem, except destroying the whole thing. And if they destroy the whole thing, then the Celestials are much less of a big deal. But it's not like they can go anywhere they want in the Four Kingdoms and they're like, well, how we're in the Four Kingdoms, but how do we get out? Like they can't even leave one kingdom, the underworld.
Let's
So
focus on one problem at a time here.
exactly. So and the Celestials, like, yeah, we'd love to. We send messengers and blessings and stuff to thwart the Infernals because they do bad stuff that we don't like. But we're kind of busy out here fighting Cthulhu and looking out for gnomes that have crashed their spelljammers and are looking for a place to stay. Like we're busy. So they're on opposite sides of the universe with their own problems to deal with, and they don't like each other. But their conflict is primarily a proxy war where they would
Yeah,
love to screw with each other's machinations. The Celestials are busy with their duties, and the Fiends are too busy trying to figure out just how to get out of the underworld in the first place, or destroy the Four Kingdoms entirely so they can escape.
yeah,
So they seem like they're natural enemies, but their paths don't cross as often as you would think.
absolutely.
How many gnome invasions have the Celestials stopped so far? Okay, so
So many.
when
Gosh, darn.
I when we were
Those spacefaring
writing
gnomes.
so when we were writing up the lore for the different races of Anacra, we were like, okay, humans arose spontaneously after the creation of the Four Kingdoms. They were like just a byproduct. They just popped up. Elves are the descendants of the free spirits of the Dawn era, and depending on like what part of life or what aspect of reality they gravitated towards, you've got your Huldra, your Alfar, your Dok Alfar, etc., etc. Dwarves are derived from the elements themselves. We've got like 8 different subraces of dwarves. Okay, that's great. Dragonborn descend from dragons, who have this really important part to play in our cosmology. Half elves are easy to explain. Okay, what else? What else? Oh, gnomes and
Half
halflings. Right. And for the longest time I was like, they're here because they're in D&D. So I guess they're here. But I have no idea how they fit into the world.
Well, are you saying this now because we had some ideas, and maybe you've now pulled away from that, but you gave me some crazy
Well,
ideas
no,
about
this
gnomes.
this is backstory. This is backstory.
Okay, just
Uh,
making sure. I didn't know
yeah,
if
yeah,
that's what
yeah.
how you still felt. Okay, good,
No,
good,
this is
good.
backstory about our process because, gnomes aren't exactly my favorite, so they weren't on my mind when we were laying the groundwork.
Yeah.
So my current pet theory is that gnomes are from space.
Oh gosh. Yep.
Yeah, like
Yep.
they arrived here as refugees, and the Celestials admitted them because, as much as I, the dungeon master, despised them, they themselves had done nothing inherently wrong. They were not forces of evil. They, again, the Celestials are on the lookout for invaders, but they are also there to rescue refugees. So they were fleeing from some great evil, or their spelljammer had malfunctioned, or something like that. They were permitted into Anacra to take shelter, and they've plagued the dungeon master ever since. When this happened, don't know yet. haven't really like worked that into the backstory.
We also had talked, mate, about how the gnomes possibly could have been fae that had then chosen immortal life, and that
Yeah.
they had so and then and those could still be the same thing. We could have in in ages past, the gnomes came on a spaceship and landed in Anacra and were permitted in, and they're like, "Look, you can go to the Feywild, but please leave all this crazy, wacky stuff somewhere else." And then after being there for a time, they're like, "No, we want to go out and play with the rest of them." And then now you get, gnomes.
That really, really tracks for like your forest gnomes and your Sverfniblin, deep gnomes and stuff like that. So I think the jury's not out yet because the Fey theory is easy to use. It's definitely more Pathfinder gnomes than D&D gnomes, but it would still fit.
Also, before we move on any more chat questions, I wanted to touch on you had discussed halflings, and you didn't really have a great idea for those either. I had
Yeah,
actually
I
been
still
putting
don't.
some thought into it. I had been putting some thought into it, and again, we don't have to lock anything down here and now. But my thoughts for halflings was that again, because they themselves, and they're based on a lot of different we have hobbits, we have Kender. There's a lot of things where halflings do come from, and they've been ported. But that type of creature, regardless of the setting you're using within Anacra, uh, they're always these very lucky creatures. And my thought would be that they are a byproduct of the influence of the Laughing God. That initially, Lady Luck, Father, Fortune's father, that entity that for the most part set the groundwork for everything, but has now let the sovereigns and their ilk produce how Anacra is going to be moving forward from here. I feel like maybe especially aside from releasing the dragons to stop the Infernals, one of the big things that once the four kingdoms were established, throwing a bit of their chaos, a bit of their luck, a bit of their live, laugh, love, wine, women, song kind of a thing into the world was, hey, what if halflings? And what if we took, like either, humans or elves? What if we took the best parts of all the races, their bravery, their cunning, their luck, their intelligence, and what if we just made them want to just take all that and say, what if I could just live the best life possible and no one could stop me? And then bam, just halflings started walking around. And you've got some that just hang out in the shires and just fish all
Mm,
day and just have a good old time. You've got some that head into the cities and will literally rob you blind and go donate it to the, to the local marketplace.
mm.
Whatever catches their eye, they just seem to be able to go out and just do it. And to me, that seems like a god that literally degaffs. And this just to me seems like the perfect reasoning for why that would be a thing.
Sees the world, sees that everyone's taking themselves very seriously. Everyone is tied into all these like different aspects, but nobody fundamentally represents having a good
Having a
time,
good time.
and is like, all right, halflings. No, I like it. I think the jury's out about gnomes. I think your theory is super probable. I think my theory, I just like the idea that gnomes are from outer space, and it doesn't may not
I
have a
love
lot
it.
of merit beyond that. So we'll figure it out. I guess the question is, how far back does the history of gnomes go in Anacra? Because the further back it goes, the more it needs to be they arose from the Feywild theory. That you could always have, you've got indigenous gnomes, and then you've got killer gnomes from outer space.
I was going to suggest, mate, you can have rock gnomes, as they are called. Their
Mm,
story is they came from the stars, whereas forest gnomes are, oh yeah, we started in the Feywild,
mm,
and it could be both. I think both could be applicable. You had
yeah.
the creatures that were once that are now gnomes were likely once something else. They could have been gnomes. They could have been something else. They came from the stars. They were permitted access. They crash landed. Whatever they think of it is, and maybe some of them ended up on the mortal realm. Maybe some of them ended up in the Feywild. Maybe some of them ended up in the Sky Kingdom, and now they're, something else entirely. But
Mm-hmm.
gnomes crash landed into Anacra and spread across the world, and much like Kerbals, that unless they can find their way into the most ingenious plans possible, they just kind of started spreading, and now you have rock gnomes and forest gnomes and whatever else could be out there. But
Yeah.
I think it could all be true, and maybe it's all a lie. Maybe gnomes are just, maybe gnomes are just a figment of everyone's imagination, and people just putting the thought they can into gnomes just springs them into existence. And if everybody all across the world at one moment just says, "I don't believe in fairies," all gnomes would just disappear, and they never would have been there in the
Chat,
first place.
chat, I need you. I need you. This is my hour of need. I need you all to stop believing in gnomes and the nightmare will be over. Uh, I think we'll talk about goblins another time because
Yeah.
goblins have such a big presence in D&D that they're going to, and our approach is a little bit different. So I think
Yes.
we will address that another day. Until
I would love
then,
an
go ahead.
episode that would I would like and not the next one maybe, but another episode we could cover, the goblinoids, orcs,
Mm,
hobgoblins, goblins in general, or maybe even moving into ogrekin.
mm.
Like Joe was saying, we have a very different take on a lot of those ancestries that I would love to devote an episode to.
Agreed. I'll add that to the list. Until then, this has been our Lunch and Lore Hour. Matt, any closing thoughts on Celestials or any of the stuff that we discussed?
I was initially excited but worried about this, and we got a lot more out of this than I was expecting, and, the Celestials, I would say, now that we've discussed it, feel a lot more fleshed out than I ever thought we did, so I
Hooray! Yeah, chat. A lot of the time, you're witnessing stuff actually, coalescing on the spot instead of us reciting stuff that we've already done.
or just stuff that's been building for 10 years that we have in our mind palaces. Yeah, we talked about that and go, okay, you know what? Let's put that on the board. Let's nail that down.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for hanging out. Until next week, stay tuned. We'll hopefully have some announcements about other shows coming up soon. But this has been Lunch and Lore with your hosts, Tormented by Gnomes and NinjaManMat. Have a fantastic Friday and enjoy the weekend.